All right, it's setting up. Okay, we're live. Sorry, everybody, for the technical difficulties. Welcome so much, or welcome to Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. My name is Kathryn Hall, and I'm curator at Houston Center for Contemporary Craft, and we are currently inside the exhibition Metaformation. Today we have a very special guest with us. Mr. Kaczynski, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Ted Kaczynski. Hi, I'm Rachel.
Welcome, Rachel. Thank you so much for your time. To give you a proper introduction on this wonderful Halloween afternoon, Rachel is the organizer of this phenomenal exhibition and also a metal worker. We'll actually be able to check out some of her work in the space. And today we're going to kind of walk through and discuss how this exhibition evolved. And then we'll allow probably about 15 to 20 minutes at the end for questions. So welcome so much, Rachel. You're joining us from Waynesville, North Carolina, in your new digs. You've just moved from New Orleans, which glad that you made it safely, and really exciting for you as you kind of set up your new studio in Waynesville. So welcome, welcome. So I think I wanted to kind of get started with really kind of discussing a little bit about, for our audience, how this exhibition came into being. So it's kind of evolved since it was last on view at the Appalachian Center for Craft. And, you know, I wanted you to maybe, could you give a little bit of background about what inspired you to organize this exhibition and kind of talk about some of the key players that were involved in selecting the work?
Yeah, so it started as an offshoot out of the SNAG 2017 convention that was in New Orleans, and Zach Lehash, who was one of the artists in the show, and I organized an exhibit called New Iron Age that was at a space that I knew about in New Orleans, and it was really well received, but it was only for the convention, and it was so much work, and all of the artists who participated put so much trust and effort and expense into getting work there and participating in general. And I learned so much that it seemed a shame not to do a more full and thought out and extensive show. And so then I started reaching out to venues and kind of getting together the idea behind the show, which would be some kind of juried exhibit, a national survey, like where the prompt for jurors is that these should be the best examples of work that is forged, inspired by forging, or involves forging or the inspiration thereof in the process. And so I felt like there have been a lot of shows in the blacksmith community, but not on a national stage. Mm-hmm. It's been pretty insular and an inside conversation between blacksmiths. And I felt like working to the best of my ability to reach out of that crowd to the general public to make sure that this was a conversation within the greater critical craft realm was important and different and it hadn't been done in my awareness on a national scale since the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft hosted Forged, Quenched, Tempered and Quenched in 2010, and the Metal Museum had Iron 2010. I think that was the name of it. Both beautiful, both amazing and inspiring shows, but that was 10 years ago already. And it seemed time.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to, because felt like it was really important to be speaking outside of exclusively the blacksmith community, I wanted to include a contemporary craft curator. And so I thought that Sarah Darrow was doing just like phenomenal, inspiring, just like her taste does something for me where I'm just like, God, I wish I thought that way. And then
she's amazing.
And she to be the
she was a fellow here, the Craft Center, at the time when she was during the show, which is kind of how I first heard about this exhibition coming into being. So it's exciting to be able to finally bring it to the Craft Center, especially knowing that connection there.
It was amazing hearing her and the other jurors talking about the work. It was just like phenomenal to be a fly on the wall.
So tell us a little bit about the other jurors.
Right. So Haas Haley is an acclaimed, inspiring public artist. He's primarily a public artist and does gallery work and just large monumental scale work. And some of his, in this iteration of the show, some of his maquettes maybe, or inspirational board is there. So I haven't gotten to see it, and except for in pictures, and I wish that I could see those pieces. I just think that his work is incredible. And Andy Cooperman, who's a jeweler. So like we have both scales, but neither of that. Haas is trained as a blacksmith, and Andy uses forging extensively on the jewelry scale, but no one is part of the contemporary blacksmith conversation currently. And I felt like that was going to be really interesting so that we could kind of critically assess what's going on. And because of my connections within the field are like, maybe they're broad, but maybe they're limited. It depends on who knows who. And so my ability to get out the word about the call. So I put out a call for artists. I put it on Cafe, I think. It's been a while now. And because I wanted it accessible to everyone who could do it. And I offered for people for the fees to be waived if they couldn't afford it. And I like made sure that it was as accessible as possible, because juried exhibits, there's a long conversation to be had in the arts community about accessibility there, but we won't have that today. Yeah. But I wanted it to be as accessible to people who thought they fit the bill as possible. We had a lot.
I think you might have frozen for just a second. Rachel, can you hear us? Well, let's see. While Rachel is currently frozen, I think I can just go ahead and add that.
A really amazing applicant. I can hear you.
Now we can hear you. Better?
Oh, yeah. Do you need me to repeat anything?
If you could repeat probably the last like 10 seconds, maybe. So you were talking about waiving the fee for the call because you really wanted it to be as accessible as possible, and also really encouraging people outside of the traditional blacksmithing community to apply to this exhibition.
My connection is certainly stronger amongst contemporary smiths in the States. And so I figured that those would be the people, and a lot of them know a lot of people. So I was hoping that they would tell their friends to apply, and I reached out to people individually to like spread the word. And so I think that it worked it worked. I'm sure that there are people who should be in it, but I think that you and I in the second iteration did a pretty good job filling out those holes.
So just to kind of clue the audience in, this exhibition was originally on view at the Appalachian Center for Craft. And in bringing it to the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft, we had a much larger space. And so Rachel and I, with the jurors' blessing, extended and expanded the show to include different metal workers that we felt like were bringing something to this selection of work that from the juried portion that was not shown. And these were also people that didn't necessarily apply to the call either. So we are hoping that, this is in its second iteration, an even more representative snapshot of what contemporary blacksmithing looks like today, and metalworking, quite frankly. And I think that's one of the things that I really love about this exhibition is how broadly we're looking at blacksmithing and its influence, and how it's really kind of works and inspires just metalworking in general. And I think seeing these different artists who are working with this material in just incredibly different ways. And I think this show does a really excellent job of demonstrating that to people. And really, I think for someone that doesn't have an understanding of what blacksmithing is, who's not entrenched in the field, so to speak, I think it really allows one to kind of come in and explore and see everything from beautiful tools that are being made and silverware, all the way to these like really incredible pieces of furniture and sculpture, all working with metal. So big kudos to you, Rachel, for getting this undertaking under your belt, because I know it's really a lot to organize something like this. And I think the way that you kind of organized it with an open call, I think is really important. And also your thoughtfulness to accessibility and really trying to choose jurors that you felt like would really kind of broaden and expand how we are thinking about what blacksmithing is, and also the influence that it has in the greater reach of just craft in general. So thank you so much for putting this together. It's a big undertaking.
It is a big undertaking, and I hope that a curator who has more connections than I do in the field of exhibiting like picks up the banner, because it is there's a huge deep well of creative talent in this field, and I feel like it's significantly underrepresented in terms of the craft community. Maybe it's because blacksmithing is a process rather than an object, and there's such a wide variety of applications for that process. But there were so many people who were so inspiring and influential along the way of like making this successful and giving me clues of what to think about, like Carissa Hassong at the Metal Museum. She was so honest and wrote me several letters of recommendation and just really guided a lot of my thinking. And just conversations with Delith Dunn, who's at the Hereford College in England, who organized several exhibits in Europe, and I hope we get to see them over in the States. She was just so kind and generous with her time, and just those two, and I'm sure lots of others, because I was talking to people at the time. I was organizing a lot. I don't actually know how I organized so much and worked full time at that time, but it's a good time for me to do it. But the show is like started at the Appalachian Center for Craft, where Deborah Rosinski was the director at the time, and she was so great. I mean,
Yeah.
I had to make her a present. She was just so phenomenal.
She's amazing. She actually helped us get the work here to Houston. She drove work herself to Houston, which I have to say, like, big, big thanks to Deborah. We could not have done this without her.
She's incredible. She's just so considerate and really, really gets it. And like every place that I couldn't keep it together, like she picked the ball right up, and like organizing stuff from many places, and each person having other things to do was really challenging. And she really, really stepped up and was like, I don't know, like I didn't know her. She just thought this was a good idea. And I'm so thankful that she did, because I don't know, like I had to kind of get an artist roster together to plug it. So like I was committed to showing. I kind of had, it was probably, there are probably better ways to do it, but I tried really hard. And it's fortunate.
It's a beautiful show, definitely worth it. I want to, before we get too far into the conversation, it might be a good time to switch cameras and we can walk through the show, because as much as we're talking about the organization of this exhibition, I really want to get into the work, because there are really so many wonderful pieces in here. So bear with us for just a minute. We're going to switch cameras. And I apologize, guys, if I'm sounding a little wonky. I'm listening through a Bluetooth headphone set, but there's a little bit of a lag or a delay, but we're working with it. So we're going to switch cameras. And I have to say also big thanks to Blaze Middleton, who's our cameraman. I'm also going to put my mask on, because I want to be really mindful, since Blaze and I are close together in the space, that we can kind of be safe. So just bear with me 1 second.
And Kathryn has also been an incredible, inspiring light through many dark days, especially this year. She's been just so great to talk to. And when we're all kind of alone, she's been a really great company.
Let's see. Okay, I think I've spotlit this video, so we just should be seeing the exhibition space. Rachel, let's think about where we want to start. I know I have some pieces that I mean, it's really hard because there's so many great pieces in this show, but I'm kind of curious for you, especially as a metal worker who really has a deep knowledge of the field, what are some pieces that kind of stand out to you?
So this kind of, I think in some ways these two artists dovetail, and they certainly are people who have been some weird ways very influential in the field. Jeffrey Funk and David Seacrest.
Oh, yes.
Not only are
we're close to David's work. So Blaze, do you mind
let's talk about David for
giving a detail of this?
So David works in Montana, actually in the same valley as Jeffrey Funk. And it's so wild. He is incredible. I went to his studio in the summer of 2016, I believe. He built his studio. It's kind of the basement to his house that he built. And it's got a kind of round stone wall where he has a 1,000-pound steam hammer, a Niles beament for anyone who is interested. And all these like rollers and things to kind of create texture and forge welding. And he does those wild patterns and textures there. And
Yeah, he's kind of a master of surface design.
and he was a master metalsmith in 2017, I believe, at the Metals Museum. And so, and Jeffrey
had his own solo show.
He had his own solo show there, and Jeffrey and he worked on his catalog for that show. And I think it's a really good resource. I found it very interesting. So then all of these textures and surfaces, like I kind of got more process from him there. He wasn't really interested in talking about what's behind it, but he uses these fields, in my interpretation, as like hidey holes and places to capture your eye. And just like, I mean, this piece looks to me like an altar missing its reliquary, you know? I mean, those are layers. You can see the layers that he's forge welded together, and it's just so, it's impeccable. And so I think part of what's interesting about smithing and craft in general is like who we look up to and how we have mentors. And it's something that Kathryn and I have talked about and we were interested in addressing in this conversation. And so part of
why— Do you want to take a look at Jeffrey's work, and we can kind of talk about that too? Because I think he's also a big mentor within the field.
He is not only, I mean, in the field, yes, but I can speak to it personally. Like I would classify him as my second father. We just had a, I think, 2-hour conversation earlier this week and talked about all sorts of stuff. But so he's taken this surface and he's taken metaformation and transformation from the forging process directly. And so he is very interested in rocks and he forges them. Probably the most transformative moment in my career was helping him in 2014 at an Abana conference where he was demonstrating, and I pushed a wooden stick through a rock. It was transformative, and he is a genius. So what he's done here is he's forge welded some wrought iron that he took out of a bridge. He has a penchant for taking down iron bridges in his area in Western Montana. And he uses the iron from the bridge in all of his work.
Well, I think what I really love learning about his work is really his conscientiousness towards sustainability within the field of blacksmithing, and just how he is thinking about repurposing material in that way.
Yeah, it is pretty unique, I would say, in the field. Like the way he has built his shop, which he has turned into a school called the New Agrarian School. So I mean, he builds his own power hammers and they're phenomenal to use. And he repurposes as much as possible, and everything about his kind of life practice seems to me to be somewhat integral to how he considers the forging process and like order of operations and considerations in that, and like how that has expanded itself in his consideration of being like environmentally conservative and being just a really, like, who would have thunk about making smushing a rock, a dish into a rock? That's awesome. But like he heats those rocks up in a kiln. I don't remember how hot, but he does it very slowly, and then they are siliceous rocks. That's a granite. He's used andesite that a lot, but anyway, that's a kind of rock. And
it isn't granite for sure.
Yeah, but we should
Um,
continue
yeah.
more. Because I think that it works well going to Josh Goss's piece, who he does to the left.
Mhm.
Yeah, right there. So he also is really concerned with geology in his work. And
Mhm.
I think that like seeing these striations and how he's pressed them together. I mean, you guys did such an incredible curation of this show. I just wish I could be there so badly. And
I wish I'd too.
I know it's so sad. But he's been working on this striations and geological effects and replicating that in metalwork for a long time. And
Yeah.
he's become quite a successful.
Well, and so he's actually working with different types of metals to create this kind of um, stratification. And this part is part of a series called ductile compressions. Um, but it is just really mesmerizing. And I think it's really interesting too, is to see how the different types of materials that he's repurposing interact with one another, based off of like their own material makeup, and then just how they respond to that pressure of the hydraulic press.
Yeah, it's so cool. And then seeing it so explicitly by cutting it apart and seeing what the edges looks like before it's sanded, it's so cool. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm psyched about that piece.
Well, and
And
I think too, it kind of, these pieces speak to the exhibition title, meta
yeah,
formation, and how many metal workers are really kind of thinking about the field in general and just like how their material responds. And so I think that this grouping of work really does a phenomenal job of kind of speaking to the meta issues within the field itself.
yeah, I totally agree. And I think that there's a lot of, I mean, part of, I think, what made the title appropriate was that so many people in blacksmithing do think about this transformative nature of the material that we're working with, and
Mm-hmm.
how it is so malleable and then also so hard at moments, and how it changes throughout the process. And I think that the next piece down, I mean, I could talk about all these pieces for ages. I like stared at them forever, and I would stare at them more. But I think so. We started with the idea of mentor and mentee. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that some of the, we could talk about some of the mentee attitude. This is
Yeah.
Johann Postlamer. He is a European smith who is just making crazy stuff. Um,
Well, and thinking about that relationship between mentor mentee, I also think about like to the right here, we have Mike Rossi's work,
mhm,
um, which is this incredible inflated steel piece called Ansible. And I know that he mentioned that he kind of learned this technique from Elizabeth Brim, who's
mhm.
also in the show, who lives in Penland, North Carolina, that started working with this technique of inflating steel. And so it's kind of interesting to see how other people that are coming into the field are really kind of taking some of these techniques that they're learning from their mentors and applying them in very different ways. Because Elizabeth is really creating these badass pieces that are really replicating these what are often thought as feminized elements of like lace and pearls, and she's created like some pillow forms out of blacksmithing, and then you have that in comparison to something like Mike's work, which I think is just so strikingly different than something that Elizabeth would create.
Yeah, and you know, it all cycles back to this idea of process and what can be accomplished with a set of ideas and a set of methods, and how widely varied that can be. And there's just no end if you understand these basic ideas behind it. And so like this is done by inflation. So Mike gets the object hot in what must have been a pretty big forge. And he inflates it with hot air, with compressed air. And it's so cool. So he's like welded all the seams and patterned out and done all of the, I mean, patterning is really important in most crafts, I think, but he has just done such a beautiful figuring to understand how it's going to pleat and how it's going to inflate and how he's going to make everything go out evenly. And it's really cool. And it's really, I'm excited about that piece. Elizabeth didn't have a piece that has this technique in it. And so she has one that's primarily forge welded and so meticulously done. It's really, and she does it in like, she named it scroll, and it's I think it's, I'm not there, but I think it's behind you.
Yeah, we're gonna walk that way.
Oh, this show looks so good.
So here we are. So it's very strikingly different from the piece that Mike has in the show.
But they're good, you know, they've, I would classify Elizabeth as a mentor to many, many, many people. And her impact in the field is definitely significant. Hugely significant.
Well, I love, I mean, this piece is just so meticulously beautiful. I mean, I think of a scroll form as something that you often see in architecture, architectural ornamentation and ironwork. And I think that she's done such an incredibly beautiful job of bringing this motif into this three-dimensional form.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So what are some other, there's so many pieces we could talk about. What other works jump out in your mind?
I think it would be worth, oh yeah, oh, all of them. I love like the way that you guys organize this show with the kind of humanoid parts and the kind of like getting into that where we're yeah, some ways referencing the body. And I also feel like there's a good value now that we're with this work. Oh, it's so beautiful. There's a good value also in looking at Steve Yusko and Zach Lee Hash's work, where there's really successful mixing of.
So Blaze, we're gonna go over here. Here's a great wall with both Zachary and Steven's work. I really love how both of them are incorporating their metalworking with other materials. And, you know, I think that we often think of metal as being so like hard and rigid, and it is so beautifully interacting with these other fiber materials or like bent wood in this really nice way.
They're just so pleasing.
And I think another person that does an excellent job of that as well is Andrew Hayes's work.
That's what inspired me to talk about this. His book work is awesome.
So Blaze, if we want to walk over here, this piece here is his chevron work. And Andrew is actually deconstructing a book and really kind of creating this chevron pattern, which you can kind of see by the like negative space of the sculpture. If you look at it straight on, you can really see that chevron form. So combining book paper with fabricated steel. And I think that he's really kind of subverting the way that we're thinking about the material properties that we ascribe to both paper and steel, and thinking about steel kind of working to bind this form and making paper more sculptural, especially book paper, than one would typically think, deconstructing its meaning from what would have been printed on its pages in the book that's been repurposed. It's a really beautiful piece.
Kathryn, what are your favorites?
Oh gosh, I have so many pieces that I love. I think one of my favorite pieces in this show is one that we added. David Harper Clemens' work.
Yes.
I love this piece is called The Overlooked Bread Basket, and it's part of a series that really is paying tribute to all of our essential workers. So this particular series of this bread basket is paying tribute to our yard workers. And I think, you know, especially during COVID times, we really focused a lot on this concept of essential workers. And I think David is just so beautifully creating these individual leaves here. And I think the simple act of sharing a meal with somebody, sharing bread with somebody, thinking about the concept of a bread basket, it's just a really beautiful piece. He's actually working to create this rake that he's curving as both the handle and the base for this basket.
It's so beautiful. Can we just have a look at his other piece as
Oh,
well?
it looks like my headphones have died. Blaze, do you mind if I borrow yours for a moment? Sorry, please bear with us with the technology. Thank you, Blaze. Let's see, I think I can hear you now, Rachel.
Do you think that we could go and take a look at David's other, just because I haven't gotten to see them in person and I love his work so much.
Do you want to connect it to your computer?
Bear with me one moment because there's a little bit of a lag, and I think what I might actually have to do is try to connect these. We could actually maybe put the mic, can we listen on Zoom here?
Oops, go ahead. That's a good idea. Just open your.
Okay. All right. That's not gonna work. I think what I'm gonna do, one moment, is I'm gonna that's not gonna work. Okay. So I think we should be good now. It's back on, but I'm gonna have to hear.
Oh, through the computer?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, or we can. Is this gonna play? Is it playing on there, the speaker? No. Okay.
So strange.
Um, all right, so I think,
Or something.
I think.
I'm trying now.
Let's try now.
Yeah. Can you hear?
This is much better. Okay, I think we've got it fixed. I'm gonna have to walk through with this laptop, but Blaze, you and I can't get too close to one another.
Yeah.
So, sorry everybody, thanks for bearing with us.
Did she?
Rachel, where were we?
Is Rachel there?
I'm here still.
Okay. Sorry, y'all. Okay, so we were talking about
The handle.
so yeah, I would say David this is probably one of my favorites, although there's so many great pieces in this exhibition. David is actually in El Paso, he's from El Paso, Texas, India, who's currently living in North Carolina, so there's a really nice connection, I think, between Texas and North Carolina there.
Hey, Kathryn, I'm not sure that people can hear you.
Okay, so let's try this. Wait, if you'll turn off the mic on your Zoom,
Turn off the mic.
can
I
everybody
can hear you. I can hear you now.
Okay. So what I did is I've turned the mic on from my computer. So, okay, I think we should be okay now. And I'll just carry the computer around with me. So, Rachel, we're actually pretty close to where your work is in the exhibition. And I wanted, since we have you here, I would love for us to be able to take a look at these incredible pieces that you've loaned us for the exhibition. I think one thing in the second iteration that we really felt was important, the first iteration had Andy's work in the exhibition, and we wanted the opportunity to incorporate work by all of the jurors, as well as Rachel as organizer in the show, in its own section. And so just because this exhibition is really a snapshot of the field, and so I think it's really important for us to acknowledge as well the role that these different individuals like Rachel have played in helping shape the field as well. And I think, Rachel, you're such a humble individual, but I know that you also are kind of your own mentor with different metal workers that you've interacted with in the work that you're doing. I know, for instance, we worked to include one of your mentees, Sachi's work in the show, which I'm really excited about. And maybe we can go over and look at their work in a moment. But I would love for you to kind of, maybe we could take a look at this beautiful furniture that we have on display. And so the table itself, it's called bound helical table, and I really love the bodily quality that it has. I think that it's just really, I think it gives me like this very like visceral feeling. I think that there's this real beauty in kind of these organic forms that you're teasing out here, and certainly kind of that like helical form as it's really kind of undulating, becoming the main leg of this table is really striking and unique. And so you're working with kind of a repoussé technique of a sort, right, for this?
Yeah. It's repoussé, but it's all done hot and without any support material, primarily without support material like pitch, because it's done hot. And it's all steel, and it's done with an air hammer, pretty much exclusively, but using the same kind of shape tools that people use in repoussé work. But I'm interested in it on a scale that isn't quite manageable by hand, I would say.
Right. Yeah, so different from what we typically think of as repoussé, which is, I think, why this technique and the way that you're working with it is so unique.
Thank you. It's nice to see it. I'm really interested in that kind of visceral thing where like bulges and like bulges on a body or valleys and hills in the landscape kind of aesthetically overlap, and to kind of work with the idea of how we treat ourselves and our environment, and the overlap of all of the bad things that this society kind of brings us to be doing, like all of the ills of capitalism inflicted on our body images and our environmental perceptions, and like what we have done to our environment and our earth. They're like big macro things, but to kind of isolate it into a object that is functional and handled kind of does like that does me right. I miss making furniture. It's been a while.
And I think that like there's really something about kind of taking this almost kind of like it's very like kind of this interior feeling of the body, you know, in terms of like your organs and those things that we don't normally see, and bringing it like, you know, out into view in this way that there's this kind of almost like vulnerability to it as well, I think, when I look at these forms. And I think that as you're talking about this relationship between our own bodies and the landscapes and environments that we live in, I think that there's definitely these strong connections between the influence that we have as individuals, and also that vulnerability of those environments as well, too, that I think your piece really kind of speaks to so beautifully.
Thanks. I mean, that's like really, I've spent a lot of time like driving through our country, and I'm so privileged to have spent so much time traveling and working in different places, and just the awe of wandering through a meadow and just like feeling how my body and the earth that I'm treading on, kind of just how all of those folds and all of the weird things that bodies do, just kind of find themselves a home in that earth. And an herbalist would be able to say it much better than I probably can, because they're just like that. But a lot of my friends would be able to say it better than I am right now. I'm a little nervous talking about my stuff in front of an imaginary audience.
You're doing a wonderful job, and I'm glad that we could spend some time with these pieces. They're really striking, and certainly something that, for those who can, we really encourage you to come in and see these works in person. We are open Thursdays through Saturdays at the moment, by reservation only. And while doing things virtually is such a saving grace of sorts for us because of where we are right now with the pandemic, I think that if you do have the opportunity to come see this work in person, I highly encourage that as well. Rachel, I think, I'd love for us to be able to look at Sachi's work as well, because I know that this is kind of an interesting mentor-mentee relationship that you have with them. And I think really we're excited to be able to give them an opportunity to show this incredible piece in the exhibition. Do you want to talk a little bit about this work?
Yeah, so what we were talking about a lot, and what we I would say that we are also friends. And so being able to, Kathryn and I wanted to expand this show to include people who aren't necessarily we wanted to open up opportunities. So both Sachi Nasatir and Aaron Brinson, who's behind it, behind this, are up and coming, just really, really talented, really just right on people who work really hard. So you can see how Sachi's taken this idea of surface texture and spreading and forging, and they've taken it and really broadened and expanded these pieces and cut them, and they are working with the idea of the inspired by opioid like addiction and opioid crisis, and using kind of a very abstracted needle.
Yeah, so Blaze, if you don't mind maybe backing up a little bit so we can see the full form. I think that really comes to light. And I think, what I find interesting too is just when you start kind of taking that form of a syringe and blowing it up on this scale as inspiration, it also has this really interesting relationship to kind of its own architectural language in a way as well. I feel like this reads as very Deco-esque as well. And so I think in the way that they're looking at proportion, but I think what I really love about this piece is that it is so abstract, and I think is really kind of using this crisis that's really affecting a lot of America and around the world right now, and taking this form and abstracting it on such a level that I think you wouldn't necessarily even know what that relationship is, but yet there's still this kind of connection to it. It's kind of abstracting it to as much as possible.
And they just have such a keen eye and such a detail-oriented demeanor, and just aesthetically and principally, they are great. I miss them. They probably don't have power right now because they're in New Orleans.
Which I know has really, Louisiana has had a
It's been tough.
tough few months for sure. And I think, one thing that is important, I think, to kind of mention too, is I know that this type of work is very costly, I think, to individuals. And I think being able to have access to a shop, like what you were able to provide, Rachel, and working with Saatchi, I think, is so important. I think one of the, there are a lot of challenges, I think, with this field. And one of these issues is accessibility. And so it's really, I think, very inspiring to know that there are individuals out there that are conscientious of that and are trying to think of ways of really kind of opening up spaces to have these incredibly talented individuals come in and really grow and learn and make and be a part of this field and this conversation. And it's something that I really hope that we can continue to see more of, because I think that the field in general would benefit greatly from being able to really open up those spaces.
Oh yeah. A little bit of background is that Saatchi has worked with me for the last couple years, and I was in and out of town a bunch, and they just came and used my shop. And they have space of their own, but it's not as high-powered equipped, I suppose, as mine. It's not yet so high-powered and equipped as mine. It will be, if they want it to be, I guess. And so they came over and used my shop and did whatever they needed to do with whatever I could offer them. So it just kind of, making stuff is expensive, and that's one of the very prohibitive things in this field. And for me to just share my space and let them use whatever they needed there, it just takes the pressure off. And it's an honor to be able to share the space. I would have loved that 10 or 12 years ago. That would have made a huge difference for me. And I hope I get to continue sharing space with prodigal people, because Saatchi is certainly a prodigy. They went to Austin Community College and studied with Haley and Colby, who are also both represented in the show. And we could turn and go and look at Colby's work. That might be a nice transition.
Yeah, so let's see. So I really, really love this piece. It's got this incredible optical effect called the Maré effect that, I don't know, Blaze, if you want to kind of move the camera from side to side, you can really kind of see the movement of it. Yeah, so this piece is called Fluctuation Portal, and you can kind of see how the lines that Colby's created by how they're bending or how he's bending the steel is creating this incredible optical effect. The piece itself is called Fluctuation Portal, and it really does kind of fluctuate and scale. And so I think that what Colby is doing with steel itself is really unique. And, I think thinking about the relevance and use of metal as a material for sculpture and op art, I think is something that doesn't get talked about enough. And I think what Colby is doing is really very, very unique in the field. Rachel, do you want to add to that at all?
No, Colby is a phenomenal metalsmith and blacksmith and human in general. Just phenomenal. I mean, everyone in this show is just, it's a privilege to know the ones that to know the people I know, and I hope I get to meet everyone else. I mean, everyone in this show is so awesome.
So I wonder, it's 4 o'clock now. I wonder if there are any questions?
I think it's time we take questions. Yeah.
Okay. So it doesn't seem like we have any questions as of yet. Maybe we can continue talking for a few more minutes, and if anybody has something they'd like to chime in or comment, if there are any participating artists that are watching, if you want to chime in the chat, feel free to go ahead. Of course, if there's something that you're really interested in looking at in particular, we are more than happy to walk through. And
I think we could go and do a pan over Tiff and Warren's work also while we're over by Colby's.
So really excited that we were able to include Tiff Massey in this exhibition. And actually, if you are in Houston, the new building at the Museum of Fine Arts is about to open in mid-November, and Tiff will have a piece on view in their new building, which is really exciting. But Tiff was somebody actually that we came into contact with. She had a show at the Craft Center that Sarah Darrow actually curated. Tiff is an artist from Detroit, Michigan, and she studied at Cranbrook and worked in jewelry and metalsmithing. And what I love is this incredible language that she's developed in creating these monumental forms of jewelry out of steel. And so what you're looking at here is her is actually a prototype that she created for a much larger public art sculpture that one would be able to actually walk through. And it's of a spring form. And I think it was really interesting to be able to include a prototype in this exhibition, because certainly, I think it's a beautiful sculpture in and of itself, but it also kind of goes into this other aspect of metalworking, also thinking about Haas Haley's work too, and kind of that process of what steel is able to do on a really large scale, and looking at just how prototypes work and imagining what this might look like on a much larger scale.
I got to hear her speak a few years ago. We were both at the Seattle Metal Guild Symposium, and she talked about the idea of adornment quite a bit. And I think that most blacksmiths would have joked that we make house jewelry, and like what she's doing is is adorning giant spaces, and it's so it's so smart, and so kind of I think it's kind of funny almost in the most smart kind of way, where she's literally making jewelry to exist in and around and to occupy. And that's just like so telling of her great taste, and like her sense of aesthetics are so broad and funny and like daring. And
well, I think for her, like her language, she's really using jewelry to connect with jewelry as a symbol of like economic vitality, specifically within the Black community. And I think, what's really exciting about Tiff's work too is thinking about the relationship that she has with her city of Detroit, and thinking about these symbols taking over spaces in such a big monumental scale, and really kind of being representative of all of the work and efforts that the Black community has put into that city, and really like owning, taking ownership of that, and really celebrating that, I think is something that's really important, and something that she is doing that I think is very, very unique.
I hope lots and lots of people are given those, get those opportunities, because that's like a universally not well done in our country. It's just like there's been so much contributions to this country literally built by Black people. So it would just be, she's amazing. I have I'm only in awe of all of the stuff that she's done. Also in awe of Warren, who has like a whole other kind of tongue-in-cheek humor.
So I definitely think I see this like fun, playful humor in Warren's work, and also just his work is, I think, very playful, but also is so exemplary of his masterful skill. To also, he's working kind of with repose to create some of these animal forms in his furniture. But I think these three pieces that we have in the show really kind of show the range of that. And Rachel, you probably can best speak about this, but can you talk a little bit about kind of the process that he would have had to undergo to create this fully like three-dimensional pig head?
I mean, it's absolutely magic, but yes and yeah. So that's done out of one. It's done. I believe he soldered those ears on, and there's some. He's very good at documenting process on Instagram, but that whole head is pulled up out of that sheet of brass, I think it is, and or bronze or Muntz metal or like. Yeah, good job. It's wild. He can do anything. I mean, his work is just so amazing. So he like uses a giant table of pitch to do these pieces. And this chicken is just so perfect.
Well, and for people who don't know what pitch is, can you say a little bit?
It's a combination of pine tar and plaster and maybe something else. I'm not sure. But it's a hard but malleable, resistant backing that people use for doing repose of a certain scale.
Okay.
So there's, I think that there's at least David, not David, those vessels in the other room, I think, are another example of work done with pitch. But the Warren's is so different than vessel work.
Mm-hmm.
It's because his ability to make a bajillion fringes at the same time as like these perfectly forged, like die forged legs, and all his mastery is, he's incredible. And
say a little bit more about die forging for folks that
oh sure,
is familiar.
So in Warren's, for example, in Warren's shop, I got to be there for a little while last year, and he will turn on the lathe a form, and then he'll on a positive on the lathe, or he'll forge it or something. He'll make it somehow, and then he'll make a negative in 2 large pieces of hot steel, where he can then then he'll put them on a spring or onto pieces that connect to his hammer directly.
Right.
And I mean, these urns are done in many these urn top kind of things, or I think that's what I would call them, at least. They're done with also with a striker and a top tool in a die to protect the other side. It's very process laborious.
You're
And
talking about these forms.
yeah, so they're done with a top tool and a striker. So there's just like so many different processes that he's employing to create all of these, and machining to get all these sharp, beautiful connections. He's magical. Pretty much everyone in this show is magical.
I think, yeah, there's so much skill. I think maybe we would want to, is there one last piece that we might want to look at together, and then we can close up the talk?
Yes, let's, oh my goodness. Well, I really like this. I think this is Stephen. These pieces right here, they are almost luminescent in their brown. They almost, like in the picture, they look like they could be glass, but they're just so finely fabricated. Those pieces, those vessels right there.
Adam's work?
Adam, yeah. Ugh.
Adam Shirley. He's from Farmington Hills, Michigan. And this is his Bellini tray. I think there's just some really gorgeous patina on it too.
That patina is so beautiful, and he's just created something that makes it almost like there's some kind of inside light. There's not, but it just seems like they're lit from the inside. They're so perfect. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that piece. Adam Shirley. I don't know what other pieces. We could go through everything.
We could go through everything. Yeah, I think maybe we can end on one last piece that I think we also have videos online on the exhibition webpage that you can actually see.
Are we going to go look at Seth's piece?
Yeah, I'd like to maybe end on Seth Gould's work. So Seth Gould, he's from Bakersville, North Carolina, and this is his indicator lock. And so you can kind of see from the mirror that we have behind it, it is actually a functional lock. And it has a special, he's created all of his own mechanisms, but essentially I kind of put this in the area where we're looking at surface design and ornamentation and surface pattern, because he's working with this incredible Japanese technique called Nunome Zogen, which is working with gold essentially to create these beautiful kind of geometric patterns on the kind of circular shape of the front of the lock. And the pattern, the center circle, if you want to, get the full thing, when you actually put the lock inside, you have to know the right combination of turns to unlock it. And so it's called an indicator lock because it would actually alert the owner of an intruder based off of how this inner circle would either line up or not line up with the outer circle. And so it's referencing, these are actually a special kind of lock that was, you kind of started seeing in like the 18th century. And I think, in terms of thinking about this aspect of metalworking that we really don't talk about enough is these different kind of mechanical ways of creating utilitarian objects such as this lock that's just so beautifully and masterfully done. that I'm really excited that we could include this piece in the show, because I think that in thinking about that broader spectrum of what is blacksmithing, what is metalworking, it's really important that we really kind of give recognition to these incredible craftspeople like Seth, who are still working with these forms that oftentimes get overlooked, I think, in some ways. And of course, like Seth, I think, is really, I think it's very clear that he's a masterful craftsperson and what he does, and brings attention to these more kind of utilitarian features often get overlooked. So
Perfect.
well, Rachel, it has been such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for, and I'm going to switch cameras here in just a moment so that we can actually see each other. Let's see here. Thank you so much, and for also bearing with us, everybody who's watching online, with all of the technical difficulties. I really, really appreciate it. And please, if you're in the Houston area, please stop by and check out the show in person. We are requiring reservation only, and keeping it to 25 people in the building at any given time, just so that we can all safely space out and experience the show in person. And if you can't come in person, we completely understand. We've worked to upload a lot of information onto the exhibition webpage. Several different artists that are participating in this exhibition have generously allowed us to include some process videos. For instance, you can actually see a behind the scenes look at Rachel, for instance, working. If you're kind of curious about their process. And we also have a wonderful extended learning PDF that, and also a catalog that you can explore and purchase online, actually, from the original exhibition that Rachel put together. So I hope
there's some really nice writing by some of the artists, really thoughtful, and some great thoughts from Sarah Darrow. She is stunning in every way. And so, Kathryn, you've just been incredible, and every conversation we have has brought a greater sense of purpose, or a reinvigorated sense of purpose. And thank you for understanding all of the weird things that have happened the last couple years.
Well, it's been so wonderful getting to know you, Rachel, and I hope that this exhibition is just one of many to come. I think that, you know, certainly we at the center feel like it's really important to give space to metalworking, and I think that there's some really exciting things that are happening in this field that we certainly hope to continue being able to provide a space to exhibit this incredible work. So thank you so much, Rachel. I really appreciate all of your time and effort, and I hope that eventually at some time in the future we can toast together in person. So
I hope so. I hope in that show. I want it so badly.
Well,
thank you for everything.
Yeah, sure. Come visit us. The show will be on view through January 3rd. And be well, be safe, and have a happy Halloween.
Stay safe, y'all. Bye, Kathryn. Bye, folks.